Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay, here to talk a little bit about the WWF in 1992. I did a review before, a video before on the WWF in 1993, and it was really successful and I had a lot of fun doing it. So I figured I'd go back a year earlier to 1992, which is a year in WWF history that is very uh, tumultuous, very crazy, very unpredictable because of what happens not only on screen but behind the scenes as well. Well, as I always do with these year in review videos, I like to go back a little bit the year before I do the year that is the focus of the video and go a little bit back, a little ways back to the year before. So 1991, I'll start there at the end of 1991. Survivor Series 1991. Hulk Hogan loses the World Wrestling Federation title to a guy who's only been there a year, and that is The Undertaker. Appropriately enough, we're talking about The Undertaker winning his first WWF Championship or WWE Championship, whatever way you want to say it, on the same year that he is retiring. He, keep in mind, debuted Survivor Series 1990, so like he's already been here for 2 years in 1992. But in 1991, with the help of Ric Flair, he beats Hulk Hogan and he wins his first championship. Also in Survivor Series 1991 is the the exit of the Ultimate Warrior. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Ultimate Warrior. The Ultimate Warrior at SummerSlam 1991 had his last match in the WWF. It was the match made in hell. It was himself and Hulk Hogan versus Adnan the Sheik and Sergeant Slaughter. Keep in mind, throughout the whole of 1991, or most of 1991, since WrestleMania, Sergeant Slaughter had been feuding with Hulk Hogan. Sergeant Slaughter had been the turncoat of America. We were deeply embroiled in the first Gulf War with Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. And George H.W. Bush, who was the president at that time, decided to send troops in. So Vince McMahon decided to mimic that and put the war on television. He was successful with doing that in the 80s with the Iranian hostage crisis and Hulk Hogan. When Hulk Hogan first came in 1984, he beat the Iron Sheik. The reason why the Iron Sheik was such a huge heel was because, you know, they were taking advantage of the geopolitical environment of that day. But it was years and years removed. Hogan won the title in '84. The hostage situation happened in '79. Unlike with the actual war was really going on, and a lot of the papers in the Los Angeles Sports Coliseum, where they were supposed to have the pay per view WrestleMania 7, they were really upset about this. You know what I mean? Bob Costas, who was one of the celebrities penciled in to attend WrestleMania that year, decided and declined not to go because he was like, what they're doing on a wrestling program is really pathetic. There are really soldiers out there dying, to in this war, the first Persian Gulf War, and for them to take advantage and use it in a wrestling angle and pretend like Sergeant Slaughter is a turncoat of America and Sergeant Slaughter is coming out to interviews with. They didn't have Photoshop at that time, but you know, doctored photos of himself with Saddam Hussein wearing a keffiyeh, an Arab headdress, and praising Saddam, praising Saddam Hussein. And you have the Iron Sheik as General Adnan, which is very odd because the Iron Sheik is Iranian and not Iraqi, and the Iraqis and the Iranians spent the entire 1980s going to war with each other, and they pretty much hate each other, especially Saddam's regime that was anti-Shia. You know what I mean? But anyway, they repackaged the Iron Sheik as Mustafa, and they used Adnan Al Qaisi, which is a famous heel from AWA, as who went to high school with Saddam, by the way. when he was living in Iraq. Funny, he went to high school with Saddam. He comes to America, and before he is the gimmick of Adnan Al Qaisi, he was Billy Whitewood. So he was a fake Native American. So, but here he is General Adnan, and the Iron Sheik is Mustafa, and Sergeant Slaughter is yelling and screaming, that he loves Saddam Hussein, that he feels betrayed because the American wrestlers made peace with Nikolai Volkov. This was during the time of detente and almost the end of the Soviet Union. So again, Vince McMahon taking advantage of geopolitical situations. But people thought it was in poor taste. But anyway, that's the event, WrestleMania 7. Stars and stripes all over. Hulk Hogan wins the WWF Championship for the third time. The match was pretty boring. They put some blood in it, and the greatest thing in the match was actually the end of the match when Sergeant Slaughter threw the fireball, but we didn't get to see that on the pay-per-view. They showed that after in the Coliseum home video. So, going into the end of 1991, Hulk Hogan is still the champion. But Ultimate Warrior, he has exited the company. During that match, he ran out of the match. He chased the heels to the back. And Sid, who they had just brought in, and the whole storyline revolved around would Sid turn on the babyface tag team or could he be bought by Adnan, Mustafa, and Slaughter? Because prior to coming to the WWF, when he was in WCW, he was a heel. He was part of Skyscrapers #1, and he was part of the Four Horsemen #2. So logically, if he was a heel when he was Sid Vicious, when he's Sid Justice, he's been repackaged as Sid Justice in the WWF, then he would be a heel too. So they don't know the babyfaces if they could trust him, right? He looks huge. He looks like a huge star. Like he looks like he's going to be the next big thing in the WWF. That the WWF is going to put the belt on him, man. Well, long story short, Madison Square Garden. SummerSlam 91, he doesn't turn heel. He remains a babyface. He remains neutral. Ultimate Warrior runs with the heels to the back, and he and Hogan are posing now. So, again, as Vince McMahon always says, Hogan must pose. So, Hogan does his post-match posing, the stuff that he would do during the Hulkamania era, and, that's the end of that. But in the back itself, Ultimate Warrior and Vince McMahon are having a contract dispute. Ultimate Warrior feels like he is owed more money. He wants more money in his contract. Vince is not willing to give it. So Ultimate Warrior threatens to not only leave the company, but he threatens to not show up for the match as advertised. Now, if there's one thing we know about Vince from reading interviews and reading the dirt sheets and reading the magazines, is that Vince McMahon doesn't like it when a wrestler doesn't show up as advertised because he feels like the fans get cheated. They pay their hard-earned money, whether it be on pay-per-view or whether it be in person, to see this wrestler perform, and this is the one they want to see perform. So say if you're a kid like 6 or 7 years old and your favorite wrestler is the Ultimate Warrior, and you beg your mom or dad to take you to see the Ultimate Warrior, and then the Ultimate Warrior isn't there, when you feel cheated, upset, angry, and even sad. So Vince definitely has a point. So he tells the Ultimate Warrior, he says, listen, I'll pay you the money that you want. Just go out there and perform this match. And you don't even have to perform the whole match. You could do a thing where you chase the heels to the back. So that's what he does. And then after Warrior comes to the back, he pays him the money and he says, you know what, you're fired. So Ultimate Warrior is fired. He's gone from the company. So there's no Ultimate Warrior. There's just the two baby faces going into 1992 are Sid and Hulk Hogan. Macho Man Randy Savage is also a babyface. Now, Macho Man Randy Savage at that same WrestleMania 7 where they couldn't sell it out because of the problems they were having with the Slaughter storyline, he has a career-ending match with the Ultimate Warrior. In hindsight, maybe he should have won this match because Ultimate Warrior got fired months after that anyway. So what difference does it make? But anyway, it's an incredible match. Um, he's the Macho King at this time. They did like 4 or 5 elbows on the Ultimate Warrior. Ultimate Warrior looks up to the sky. One of the best matches on that WrestleMania. In fact, the best match, better than the main event. And in the end, Sherry gets mad at him. She starts kicking him. And then Liz, who was in the audience, comes back, and Liz beats up Sherry, and Randy Savage and Liz are finally reunited. And as Gorilla Monsoon said on commentary that night, what a woman and what a man. Yeah, and people in the audience, some of them plants, but some of them real fans, are crying. It's a really emotional thing. As Bobby Heenan said that night, better than Love Story, Monsoon, if you like that kind of mush. As Randy Savage once again hoists Elizabeth up on his shoulder. The problem is, now, according to the rules of the WWF, Randy Savage is retired because he lost a career-ending match. So he can't come back. So also at SummerSlam 1991, not only was that the main event, the match made in hell, but there was also the match made in heaven, which was the wedding of Miss Elizabeth and the Macho Man. It was on Superstars. Everybody remembers that Mean Gene was there, and Randy Savage was like, "Elizabeth, will you marry me?" You know? And of course she says, "Oh yeah." And then they set up their marriage. Now, people knowing wrestling weddings going back to like Uncle Elmer when he got married, like in 1986, people think, oh, well, somebody's going to come in like Captain Lou Albano and Roddy Piper came in at Uncle Elmer's thing and ruined this. And over the years, wrestling weddings have been that. But in this one, 1991 SummerSlam, they don't do that. They get married, for real. Even they were already married in real life. We didn't know that. That's why Macho Man and Liz are wrestling's version of Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, because they were already married in real life. We just didn't know it, even when he first brought her in '86. But they get married, and they don't wait to do the shenanigans until after the wedding. After the wedding, they're at the reception, and they open up this this gift box, and there's a snake inside. So The Undertaker and Jake the Snake Roberts, who are now a tag team, are taunting the Macho Man. So trying to bring the Macho Man out of retirement. So there's this letter writing campaign, just like the letter writing campaign that was done for Hulk Hogan in 1990 when he was injured by earthquake. Just like that letter writing campaign, there is a letter writing campaign to bring the Macho Man back out of retirement so he can face Jake the Snake Roberts. Eventually that works, and at Tuesday in Texas, they wrestle each other. Now, what is Tuesday in Texas? Tuesday in Texas is WWF's attempt to have another pay-per-view. They have Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, and Survivor Series, but they want to expand the pay-per-view market. They tried it in '86 with Wrestling Classic. It was a tournament that the Junkyard Dog won. It didn't really work, so they stuck to the Big Four. Now they're trying a fifth one, Tuesday in Texas. And the double main event for this is Macho Man coming out of retirement to face Jake the Snake Roberts, and The Undertaker putting the WWF Championship up against Hulk Hogan. Now, everybody's wondering what Ric Flair is going to do. Because Ric Flair interfered the last time. How does Ric Flair get to the WWF? Well, let me explain. In 1988, as I talked about in other videos, Jim Crockett, the promoter of Jim Crockett Promotions, second generation promoter in the Carolinas, sells the company to Ted Turner. He had spent all his money basically to buy out the UWF, Bill Watts' promotion, which was based in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and covered the states of Oklahoma, Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, parts of Texas, for example. And Bill had tried to go national to California. It didn't really work because the states he was based out of, um, experienced an oil recession in the mid 80s, and that caused them to go out of business. So Bill had to sell the company. He had to sell it to one of the big major two companies, either Jim Croc Promotions or Vince McMahon. He chose to sell to Jim Croc Promotions. Jim then moves his base of operations from Charlotte, North Carolina, where it always was, even when his father was the promoter, to uh, to Dallas, Texas. This purchase bankrupts him. You know, he goes broke. So he has one of two choices. He could either sell the company again to Vince McMahon, or he could sell it to Ted Turner. Ted Turner didn't really do business with Vince McMahon because he did business with him in the mid '80s, and it was a bust. They went their separate ways, and Vince had to sell. They had Black Saturday, and Vince had to sell um, the Georgia territory to Jim Crockett, and Jim Crockett paid $1 million for it, and apparently that was the $1 million that financed the first WrestleMania in '85. Well, so of course Ted Turner doesn't want to do business with Vince again, and he doesn't want to lose wrestling because wrestling in the '70s was what really launched the TBS Superstation. It really gave the Superstation the most ratings: wrestling, Braves, baseball, and the Andy Griffin Show. Goes to show you the population they were marketing to. um, but anyway, he doesn't want to do business with Vince anymore. He doesn't want to lose wrestling, so he suggests that he buys the company. Problem is, and that's what happens. Problem is, Ted Turner doesn't know how to run a wrestling company. He's a multimedia, um, impresario mogul. He's busy running CNN. He's busy running the Braves. He's running the Atlanta Hawks. He's busy running basically the entire city of Atlanta and to a large degree the whole entire state of Georgia. He is somebody. He was the equivalent of a Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg or an Elon Musk today. Like a big business mogul that everybody talked about, that they wondered, oh, when's he going to start getting himself into politics, position himself like a John D. Rockefeller, or like they say about Elon Musk, or they used to say about Trump, in the '80s before he got into politics. It was like that with Ted Turner. He didn't have, he doesn't really have the time or even the expertise to run a wrestling company. So who does he call on? This guy, Jim Herd. Now, Jim Herd in the '50s, when wrestling was at its first boom in the late '40s and early '50s, based out of St. Louis, when Sam Mushnick was the NWA champion. Just like Jim Crockett was the NWA champion throughout most of the '80s because he had the biggest territory of the NWA and he had national TV. Sam Mushnick was the same thing in the '50s out of St. Louis. That's why Lou Thesz was the champion multiple times, because Lou Thesz was his boy, right? And one of his producers was this guy, Jim Herd. Now, since that shut down and everything, and Mushnick retired, Jim Herd had been working at a Pizza Hut. But the people at Turner heard that he had some experience with wrestling, and they were going to bring him back to run it, just to run it on a day-to-day basis, because to use a political analogy, say Ted Turner is the Queen of England, and Jim Herd was going to be her version of Boris Johnson, her prime minister, somebody to run it on a daily basis. Problem is, Jim Herd doesn't know anything about professional wrestling. He wants to make Ric Flair, specifically, he wants to make Ric Flair Spartacus, have Ric Flair cut off his white blonde hair and stop using his robe, put an earring in him, and call him Spartacus. This is going to work for Ric Flair. Another thing he wants Ric Flair to do is drop the title to Lex Luger. But Flair already promised that he would drop the title to Barry Windham. And also, he wants Flair to give up the title without giving Flair his deposit, the deposit that Flair and other champions in the NWA, ever since the NWA formed in 1948, paid to the other promoters. That deposit, the champion would pay it, and then when the champion would lose the belt, he would then get that deposit back. Well, Hurd doesn't want Flair to get the deposit back. So Flair says, you know what? I'm not only walking out of this company, I'm leaving this company. I'm leaving WCW, and I'm keeping the belt with me, the big gold belt, because you didn't give me the deposit back that I paid for the belt itself. You know what I mean? And I'm not putting over Luger at Great American Bash 1991. So I told Barry Windham I would put him over, and that's the guy I'm going to put over for the championship. Well, Hurd says, you do what you want. Him and Hurd have a big blow up, and then he contacts Vince and he comes into the WWE. Now, Vince is loving it because he could, just like with now, he got Cody Rhodes from AEW. He could destroy AEW with one fell swoop, but it was like that with WCW back in 1991. He has Bobby Heenan introduce the big gold belt on Superstars, and WWF fans like me, we don't really watch the NWA because you had to have cable at that time, and this was like the early 90s. So we were like, what the hell is that? But other older fans that did have cable and they were more smarter to the business, they understood, hey, this is the other promotion's championship, and Vince is promoting Ric Flair as the real world's champion through Bobby Heenan. First with the belt came over first, and then Ric Flair on Primetime Wrestling debuts himself and he challenges Hulk Hogan because all throughout the 80s, that was the thing. All the wrestling magazines would have Hulk Hogan as the WWF champion, the head of the WWF, the figurehead of the WWF against Ric Flair because they became champions at around the same time. Hogan became champion of WWF in 84. Ric Flair became champion for the second time, but when they really launched him, Flair for the Gold was at the first Starrcade in 83 in the cage match against Harley Race. So these two are the two figureheads of the interpromotional war that went on in the 80s between JCP/NWA and the WWF. So fans can't wait to see these two square off. And then now, not only has Ric Flair debuted, but he cost Hulk Hogan the WWF Championship match against the Undertaker. It's on now. These two have several confrontations. One famous one on the funeral parlor where Flair confronts him. Problem is, in the lead up to WrestleMania 8, they did something. They tested the waters with this. They had the match, Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair, in Madison Square Garden. They had it in Rochester. They had it in Albany. They had him, I think, in Worcester or Boston, one of the Massachusetts cities, and a couple of cities in Philly, basically throughout the whole territory. And nobody liked it. Everybody shitted on it, really. Because you got to understand, wrestling at that time, before the Monday Night Wars, was still very regional. Yes, you had national promotions. The WWF was national. NWA was national through the TBS Superstation. But kids in the Northeast and kids in Canada, kids like me that grew up in northeastern cities and in Canada, we didn't get to really watch the WC. We didn't get to really watch WCW. We didn't really watch WCW until much, much later. We didn't really pay attention to WCW until much, much later. So a guy like Ric Flair coming over from there and they're promoting him as the champion, he's going to look like a jabroni to us. You know what I mean? Like, we already know Hulk Hogan could beat this guy. So why are we even paying money to watch or paying money to go and see Hulk Hogan beat this complete jabroni? So Flair and Hogan, they do it around the territory and it doesn't sell out. So WWE has a problem. They're going into Indianapolis for WrestleMania. Now, they're not going to put a match on for WrestleMania that is not going to sell. So they have to pivot. At the last minute, they have to pivot. Hulk Hogan is the champion. He's defeated The Undertaker. And Tuesday in Texas, he threw the ashes in his eye. So Jack Tunney gets on there, and Jack Tunney says, well, Hogan cheated to win the WWF Championship for the fourth time, so I have to strip him of it. Now, WWF fans hated Jack Tunney at this time. Like, Jack Tunney was like he had more heat than Justin Trudeau does right now in Western Canada. This guy had heat tremendously. He was the worst hated president, since Warren G. Harding, or maybe since Nixon. Good thing he was just the president of WWF, and he wasn't even the real one. But anyway, this guy had heat for taking the WWF championship away from Hogan because it was like, hell, Undertaker cheated to win the shit. Why can't Hogan cheat to win it back? But he says no, and he's going to hold it up at the Royal Rumble. And this is the first in Albany, New York. This is the first Royal Rumble that something is at stake. For all the other Royal Rumbles, 88, 89, 90, and 91, it was nothing at stake. It was just prestige. But for this one, bragging rights. For this one, it's going to be the WWF Championship, the vacated WWF Championship held up for grabs. And the winner will become the champion. Now, people that knew Ric Flair, they knew that he was tailor-made for this match because 1989, he wrestled those series of classics against Ricky Steamboat. He did hour-long matches against a lot of people in the NWA before he was champion. Even him and Ricky Steamboat doing it hour-long Broadway matches in 75 and 74 and 76, back when he was U.S. champion. Right? But us as WWF fans, we don't know that because we're not exposed to Ric Flair. You know what I mean? So we're thinking Hogan's going to come in and win it. At least I was. No, that doesn't happen. First Royal Rumble, Ric Flair wins the WWF Championship, but I'll get back to that later. As far as Macho Man Randy Savage, he defeats Jake Roberts, and then Jake Roberts, he at Tuesday in Texas, he wants to hit Liz with a chair, and Undertaker stops him, and that leads to Undertaker becoming a babyface. That is the Undertaker's face turn because Undertaker was such a cool character that fans wanted to cheer him anyway. So Jake turns on him, or he turns on Jake. He stops Jake from. Jake already slapped Elizabeth. You know what I mean? Jake is really sinister now. He slapped Elizabeth. He wanted to hit her with a steel chair. Undertaker stops him, and that sets up their match at WrestleMania 8. Now, other matches. Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels, of course, part of the Rockers. They almost win the WWF Tag Team Championships against the Hart Foundation in Saturday night's main event in 1990. The rope breaks and the decision is reversed. And plus, there is some kind of thing with Anvil's contract that WWE doesn't trust him that he might go to WCW. So they don't do it for whatever reason. There is a picture of the Rockers with the WWF Tag Team Championships, but it never happens. So Vince is thinking now it's time to break them up. Shawn Michaels has a singles match with Ric Flair in which Marty Jannetty tries to help him out but cost him the match. And, now he has some animosity. So Brutus the Bar Beefcake, who is out of action now as a wrestler because of his parasailing accident, he has them on his Piper's Pit style show in the barbershop. And they start arguing, but then they shake hands, and then Shawn Michaels super kicks him and throws Jannetty through a window, and that's when we have Bobby Heenan's classic line that Marty Jannetty tried to run away from Shawn Michaels. See, I told you, he don't need Jannetty. and then he kicks him. So Shawn Michaels has now turned on the Rockers, and he is now the Heartbreak Kid. He has a whole new persona, which was the name that Mr. Perfect gave him as a commentator. He has a whole new persona, and he is ready to go to the races and go to the Royal Rumble with this persona. And another guy that is doing really, really well, he's come back at the end of 1991 is the British Bulldog. He is no longer a tag team wrestler. He has the braids now. He's like with Cody Rhodes. He looks like he's a superstar. He's totally different. In the UK audience, which is a big chunk of the WWE's audience because they aren't doing really well in the US because of the Iraq thing and because of other scandals that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. They kind of dropped off. Another team that is doing really well, and they themselves, they're just like Ric Flair. They made the jump from Jim Crockett Promotions uh, to the WWF, is the Road Warriors, Hawk and Animal. Now, when they first came in 1990, and they cost Demolition the championships against the Hart Foundation, SummerSlam 1990. When they first came in, people thought, okay, this is finally going to happen. It's going to be the greatest team in the WWF, Demolition, who they were often compared to the Road Warriors, versus the greatest team in um, NWA Jim Crockett Promotions history. But when they wrestle, the chemistry just isn't there. It was a dream match that the magazines made up when guys were in two separate companies. But when they finally get together and they finally wrestle, the chemistry just isn't there and it falls flat. But one team that the Road Warriors do have good matches with is the former Tugboat, as you recall, like guys recall, in 1990. Tugboat was a babyface and he was the best friend of Hulk Hogan. It was originally proposed that he was going to be the U.S. turncoat and that they were going to turn the character into Fred Ottman into Sheik Tugboat. Thank God they didn't. But he hooks up with Jimmy Hart, and Jimmy Hart becomes his manager, and they form the Natural Disasters, he and Earthquake, and they are a great tag team, and they're the ones that are going to be challenging the Road Warriors at Royal Rumble 1992, which is a pretty good match. What else on this card of Royal Rumble 1992? Oh, Bret the Hitman Hart. Bret the Hitman Hart, as you recall, the Hart Foundation breaks up because Jim the Anvil Neidhart does leave the WWF and he goes to wrestle in the Indies for a while. He's a KKK wrestler, and it's not till 1994 that they actually bring him back. But during this time, that gives Bret the Hitman Hart, who was really always the star, who was really always the one that they were pushing ever since WrestleMania 2. He was one of the finalists in the NFL versus WWF Battle Royal in Chicago, that Andre the Giant won. So, and he was he was the winner of the one at WrestleMania 4 that he turns on Bad News Brown and smashed the trophy on Bad News. So they were always kind of pushing Bret Hart, even when he first came in '86, before they formed the Hart Foundation. They really wanted him to be a cowboy. He's from Western Canada, Alberta. So, but he was like, no, I'm not a real cowboy. That doesn't really reflect my personality. And if I do that, I'll be insulting, people from my home province. And I'm not trying to do that. I'm not trying to fake the front. You know what I mean? When it comes to that, I'm trying to be real to who I am. I'm really Bret the Hitman Hart. So they formed the Hart Foundation, teaming with Jimmy Hart. And they have Danny Davis, the corrupt referee. They face a off against the British Bulldogs in a lot of matches, and they blow them away in '86, '87. Them and the British Bulldogs have some of the greatest matches on the card, even better than Hulk Hogan in the main event. But then, they, Jimmy Hart turns on them. They become baby faces. They win the tag belts again in 1990, and they lose them finally to another Jimmy Hart team, the Nasty Boys, at WrestleMania 7. And from there, Bret goes on his own. And SummerSlam 1991, the same one I talked about at the Garden, he defeats Curt Hennig for Mr. Perfect Curt Hennig for the Intercontinental Championship. What a match this was. Two second-generation wrestlers. One the son of Larry the Axe Hennig, one the son of Stu Hart. And people still talk about this match to this day, when Bret Hart won the Intercontinental Championship for the first time. Now, fast forward to 1992, he is wrestling Jacques Rougeau. Now, Jacques Rougeau, and shout out to Jacques Rougeau, because he, according to Hannibal TV, he's not doing so well right now. His health is really on the decline. And I always thought Jacques was an amazing wrestler. Especially when he was with the Rougeau brothers, again, another Jimmy Hart managed team when they were heels. And they were part of that trifecta along with the British Bulldogs and the Hart Foundation that really kept the tag team division going in the mid-'80s. But Raymond Rougeau, his brother, has retired now, and he has become an announcer, on the French side of WWE, French broadcasting for WWE. So what do? They make Jacques Rougeau a Mountie. Now, what is a Mountie? A Mountie is a Canadian version of a cop. So the country of Canada sues the WWE because they're saying that the WWE is making fun of police officers. But hell, they do the same thing with the Big Boss Man. They even had a match at SummerSlam 1991 where the loser gets to spend a night in the other one's jail, and the Mountie spends the night in in New York City, in the New York City jail system on Rikers Island at the end of the match. So they're making fun of American police as well with the Big Boss Man. What's the big deal about them doing it with the Mountie? But anyway, at this time, they don't, they've calmed down a little bit with the complaints, and the Mountie, Jacques Rougeau, gets a win over Bret the Hitman Hart at a house show. Now, Bret the Hitman Hart has some contract disputes going on in the back. There was some thoughts that he might leave the WWE and go to WCW. He has some contract offers to go there. He declines, but at this time, the storyline is that he is running a fever, and that's why he lost to the Mountie. The Mountie is the new Intercontinental Champion. This is when he was using the electric stick, and again, he was managed by Jimmy Hart. So the relationship with Jimmy Hart and Bret Hart goes way back. So, but going into WrestleMania, who's he going to face off against? Well, he's going to face off against another Canadian gentleman, a Scottish Canadian gentleman, Roddy Piper. Now, this was huge because Roddy Piper had never, ever in WCW he did. He was U.S. champion. But in the WWE, even when he was on top of his game in the first WrestleMania, the water settled the score, 84, 85, and even 86 to some extent. He was on top of his game, feuding against the likes of Paul Orndorff, the likes of Hulk Hogan, biggest heel in the company at that time. He still didn't win the championship. He's never won a championship in WWE. So going against the Mountie, you're thinking, okay, yeah, he's going to win. And he not only that, he stands to win both championships because remember, he's still in the Royal Rumble in which the WWF championship is held up. So he beats the Mountie. And he becomes IC champion. The crowd goes crazy for this, man. Albany, New York, they love Hot Rod. Man, they love to see him with the championship, and he and Bret Hart go on to have an amazing match at WrestleMania 8. And they have a funny interview in which, because see, in real life, Roddy Piper is the cousin of Bret the Hitman Hart. So Roddy Piper is talking about when they were kids and Helen Hart would come in and she would make bologna sandwiches. She'd be making them sandwiches, man. It was only one piece of bologna, but I was hungry. And then he touches Bret Hart's cheek, imitating his mother, Helen. Bret says, "Don't touch me." He says, I would have had him. And they have a heated discussion, before the match. And they have an incredible match in which looks like Roddy Piper is about to turn heel, and he is hitting Bret Hart with the bell, and Bobby Heenan's in the back. What the hell? Use the bell. And then Bret Hart is playing possum. He gets Roddy Piper in a roll-up. Roddy gets him in a sleeper. He pushes his body weight against the turnbuckle. He pins Roddy. You know what I mean? And they're bleeding. Bret Hart says it was hard way. That's why he didn't get in trouble that night. Because that time there was a no blood policy in WWE. Because they were trying to be more family friendly, more family oriented. It was an incredible match, right? Between the two. But at this point, Royal Rumble, Roddy wins both championships, man. Roddy wins the IC championship, first and only championship. And you're thinking, damn, he could win both. He can go in and win the Royal Rumble. And plus, he has history with Ric Flair. Ric Flair and him had beef with each other back in Jim Crockett Promotions in the mid '70s. At one point, I think Roddy Piper was even Rick's manager. I don't know, I didn't watch Jim Crockett Promotions or what at that time was called Mid Atlantic Championship Wrestling then, because didn't live in the Carolinas, but I know they did have history in the mid '70s in the U.S. title scene. Before WWF, and Roddy Piper was one of the wrestlers that Ric Flair called out when he first showed up there. So those are the matches for Royal Rumble 1992, the first event, Albany, New York, and people are wondering what are Sid and Hulk Hogan going to do? What is Randy Savage going to do to Jake the Snake Roberts? He's still unpredictable. Also, leading into the Royal Rumble, Ric Flair is starting to tell people that he has pictures of himself with Elizabeth before Elizabeth and Randy Savage were married, and he is hinting that the pictures are explicit, trying to really get under the skin of the Macho Man Randy Savage. Before the Royal Rumble, but especially after. So they have the Royal Rumble. It is star-studded. It's the most star-studded Royal Rumble ever, man. And Bobby Heenan is incredibly partisan in this. He's rooting for Ric Flair the entire time, even before the Royal Rumble match goes underway. He is rooting for Flair. He is rooting for Flair. He wants Flair to win. Every time another heel comes in, he's like, even not even a heel. Roddy Piper comes in and he starts beating up the baby faces, and Heenan's like, I told you, Piper. I knew it was a kilt. A kilt. It's not a skirt. It's a kilt. And then Roddy Piper hits Ric Flair. And then Bobby is like, you freaking ingrate. It's a skirt. It's a skirt. like he's going crazy. Him and Mr. Perfect, of course, who is the executive consultant of Ric Flair. So, and it goes on for an hour. Ric Flair is like number 3, and he's wrestling for an hour. He's showing us in the WWF fans, why he is the 60-minute man, why he was the best NWA champion of all time. He could wrestle for over an hour. This is incredible. We weren't used to, as WWF fans, seeing matches this long, because our guys were Hulk Hogan, our guys were the Ultimate Warriors, our guys was an over the hill Andre the Giant. Guys that didn't have the stamina in the main event anyway to go that long. King Kong Bundy and all that, they didn't have that stamina. He's showing us what NWA wrestling in the WWE is all about. And he wins. And it comes down to him, Hulk Hogan, and Sid. And of course, Hulk Hogan and Sid, like I said in the 93 video, they're allies right now. So Hogan gets eliminated, and it's down to Sid and Ric Flair. So Hogan puts his hand out to shake Sid's hand, and then he pulls Sid down. And the whole place, Albany, New York, Hogan's territory, New York, they boo him. They boo him out of the building. The boos, and the WWE had to cover it up. They had to taper over it because Hogan's still a babyface. And they had to make it look like, okay, he's just doing the right thing. You know what I mean? It's every man for himself. It's for the WWF Championship. He's doing what he has to do. But no, fans didn't like it. They booed Hogan out of the building. Sid was the one that fans really wanted to see. Sid was the one that they got behind as far as for a babyface. But Hogan cost Sid. At that point, they could have turned Hogan heel. They say in WWE that they never could have turned Hogan heel, that even when they brought him back in 2002, fans still cheered him over the Rock. There was never any chance of them ever turning him heel. That's a lie. At this point in 1992, they could have turned Hogan heel. He could have went on Superstars or Wrestling Challenge. They didn't have Raw at that time. Raw didn't debut until January of 93. But he could have went on one of the shows and been like, Sid, I knew I had to eliminate you, brother, because you got jealous of the Hulkster, man. You know, he could have said something like that. You thought you could take the Hulkster spot in the pecking order of the WWF, brother. Something to that effect, and all of a sudden the fans would have turned him heel. But they don't do that. They continue to run with him as a babyface going into WrestleMania 8, the match with Sid. And they turn Sid heel. They have a tag team match, and Hogan goes to tag Sid, and Sid drops out. He does the whole Rick Martel thing, the thing that Rick Martel did to Tito Santana at WrestleMania 5, where he doesn't tag him and he just walks away. So, and they put Sid with Dr. Harvey Whippleman to go into WrestleMania 8. And another match going into WrestleMania 8 is, speaking of Tito Santana, they have now repackaged Tito Santana, a wrestler who has been with the WWF since basically the 70s. He was on the card at the first WrestleMania. He was in the first match at the first WrestleMania. He was a great tag team wrestler with him and Rick Martel after Tom Zink left and they broke up the Can-Am connection. They needed another partner, and they put him with Rick Martel, former Intercontinental Champion as well. He is a staple in WWE wrestling, even though he went other places. WWE was his home, and people know him as Tito Santana, right? But they repackaged this man as El Manidor, a Mexican bullfighter. First of all, they do have bullfighting in Mexico, but bullfighting, if you ask people, well, where is bullfighting? What country is bullfighting synonymous with? People will more than likely, if they have any sort of worldly education, they will say, even though there is bullfighting in other parts of the Spanish-speaking world, bullfighting is traditionally synonymous with Spain. And Tito Santana is Marcel Solis, a Mexican American from Texas. He has nothing to do with bullfighting, but they think putting an El Matador gimmick on him will do something because they're starting to transition into that era where they got to put job gimmicks on people, right? Barry Darso, Demolition breaks up. Now Barry Darso is a repo man. He's repossessing people's items. He's stealing the Macho Man's hat. He's stealing other items from other wrestlers. He was just Barry Darso before. Now he's an occupation gimmick. And they will continue this trend all the way to 1996. This became a hallmark of the new generation era. As they would bring in new wrestlers, every wrestler would have an occupation that they did outside of wrestling. So Shane Douglas would be a teacher. Duke Trocy would be a garbage man. Henry Godden be a pig farmer. Sonny and Skip and Sonny would be fitness gurus. Everybody, Razor Road would be a drug dealer. Uh, everybody had, gimmicks, job gimmicks that they would do. And they did this a little bit in the classical era, like I said, with the Mountie or the Big Boss Man. Big Boss Man's a cop. Mountie is a Canadian cop. That was done somewhat, but they started to really overload with this shit in this era. And El Matador was one of the first ones to do it. Well, he wrestles Shawn Michaels at this year's WrestleMania 8, the opening match, and it was a pretty good opening match. Shawn Michaels is very accustomed to the Mexican style of wrestling, to the lucha libre style of wrestling, because he's coach. The man who put him in the business, he's from Texas too, just like Tito, is Jose Lothario. So with the training of Jose Lothario, he puts him into the business. And Shawn Michaels is very accustomed to it. Now he has Sherry in his corner. As he's turned heel, he has Sherry in his corner. Sherry has parted ways with Ted DiBiase. She dumped Macho Man for Ted DiBiase, and then she went with Ted DiBiase. And now on the funeral parlor, she announced that Shawn Michaels was her new crush, and that she was going to manage Shawn Michaels, and that's just the thing he needed. She sang his original "Sexy Boy" theme song, but the stipulation for this match is that the winner will receive an intercontinental title match. Now we're thinking, okay, the winner of the intercontinental title match, Bret Hart or Roddy Piper, that's good because Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels have a history, the Hart Foundation and the Rockers history. We don't know how big their history would get over the years, but even at this time, they had a history. Some of the Hart Foundation's greatest opponents in their second run was um, the Rockers. They had great matches together. And then when the Rockers almost won the tag belts, it was against the Hart Foundation. So Shawn Michaels receiving an Intercontinental title match against Bret Hart, it works, man. But that doesn't happen later on down the line, as you'll see. Shawn Michaels faces somebody else, you know what I mean, for the Intercontinental Championship. But he does win this number one contenders match, and it's a pretty good match. And Sherry looked great. I love seeing Sherry with Shawn Michaels. It was a very good fit. It wouldn't last that long, but it was a good fit. I love when she would stand by his side and he would push her to the ground and he would do his pose like that. You know, they were a pretty good team. Sherry was just what he needed, and they had a history back from the AWA. She used to manage Buddy Rose and Doug Summers when the Midnight Rockers were wrestling um, in the AWA. And one of the showboats, they had this, I think it was like the showboat 86, 87. They had this bloodbath between the two teams. It was in Las Vegas. It was pretty well known, pretty famous. So they had that history. She knew Shawn Michaels, and she was just what was needed to make Shawn Michaels, you know, a star in WWF. Um, Another match at WrestleMania 8 that was good was, of course, I talked about it, Roddy Piper versus Bret Hart. And the tag teams match, the Road Warriors do not wrestle for this WrestleMania 8. They only do an interview. And in the interview, they introduce their manager, Precious Paul Ellering. Now, this is the man that formed the Road Warriors in Georgia Championship Wrestling in the late 70s. The reason why they were called the Legion of Doom in the World Wrestling Federation, copyright reasons, and plus because Ultimate Warrior was already the Warrior, and Vince didn't want to confuse the fans by calling them the Road Warriors and him the Ultimate Warrior. So they came up with the name Legion of Doom. But the original Legion of Doom, not the cartoon, not Superman, but the original Legion of Doom in wrestling was a faction. Um, King Kong Bundy, Jake the Snake Roberts, and the Road Warriors in Georgia, managed by Precious Paul Ellering. So, and people knew Precious Paul Ellering as managing them in Jim Crockett Promotions when they had the scaffold match, Mighty Skywalkers in '86, right? So people knew, you know, Paul Ellering kind of, if they knew anything about wrestling, they knew about who Paul Ellering was, a genius of a man, their former manager. So they feel like they need a manager. As they said in the interview, as Hawk said, rest in peace, Hawk, Mike Hegstrand, he said, "We were like a runaway train, nobody driving us." So now they have somebody driving them. They have Paul Ellering. They do that interview, and the match they have for the tag team belts on this WrestleMania is the Natural Disasters versus the Beverly Brothers. The Natural Disasters turn heel. Turn babyface on Jimmy Hart. They portrayed Jimmy Hart after they fit, you know, after they became tag team champions, and now they're freaking, you know, been demoted down, and they don't work as babyfaces. They're wrestling the Beverly Brothers for tag team championship. So the tag team championship is really nothing. This WrestleMania, this WrestleMania, and let me just say something about the crowd. People say this crowd was low because, again, business was on the decline for various reasons after WrestleMania 7. That was kind of a peak they hit. Really, WrestleMania 6, going to Toronto, first international WrestleMania, they hit that kind of peak. And they weren't able to replicate that in 91, and they really weren't able to replicate it this year in 92. But I liked the Hoosier Dome, man. It was an outside feel. It felt pretty cool. The match between Jake the Snake Roberts and Undertaker was pretty cool. Sean Mooney's interviews were pretty cool. The match they did was like a family feud match with a Mountie team with the Nasty Boys. Um, Money Inc.'s interview. No, sorry. Go back. Correction. Natural Disasters wasn't wrestling Beverly Brothers. They were wrestling Money Inc. They were wrestling Beverly Brothers at SummerSlam. Sorry. They were wrestling Money Inc. Ted DiBiase had now formed a tag team with the returning Mike Rotundo, who again had a job gimmick. He was now an IRS agent. He was IRS, Erwin R. Shyster. And Jimmy Hart was managing them. He was no longer managing the Natural Disasters, and that was the tag team match. But the feel of this was great. Even the 8-man tag, Virgil had his nose covered because Sid broke Virgil's nose. Um, Sergeant Slaughter, now a babyface. Hacksaw Jim Duggan, now a babyface. Ray Combs from Family Feud was a huge wrestling fan who often had the wrestlers and the World Bodybuilding Federation stars on his television show. It was great. Going to the WWF Championship match. The WWF Championship match, again, Ric Flair, just newly minted, newly crowned WWF champion, threatening to show these revealing pictures of himself and Miss Elizabeth. And of course, Macho Man, what way in real life and on TV and kayfabe to get under the Macho Man's skin was to talk about Miss Elizabeth. You talk about Miss Elizabeth or you try to hit on Miss Elizabeth just like Hulk Hogan did at WrestleMania 5. Randy Savage will go. Randy Savage will go off. So no exception here. He is irate. He is ready to go. He is ready to win the WWF Championship for the second time, and he does. His gold outfit is cool. That to me, the gold outfit with the gold cowboy hat, coming out as a babyface, huge ovation. It was, as a Macho Man fan, man, this, besides WrestleMania 7, but as a babyface, as a face, this was his best performance. This was his best. Man, this was not the match they planned, but they went with it anyway. They couldn't get him they didn't want to do him and Hulk Hogan, him being Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan, so they went with the second biggest star, which is Macho Man. Just like they would do at WrestleMania 8. They couldn't get Stone Cold to wrestle Hogan, so they went with The Rock. And it turned out to be better than what probably uh, the original was. We don't know with Austin and Hogan, but we do know with Hogan and Flair because they wrestled before and they would wrestle again 2 years later in WCW. But they went with Randy. They went with Randy Savage, and Randy Savage, the gold outfit. What a tremendous outfit, and what a tremendous match, man! Ric Flair is bleeding. He's busted wide open. Vince told him don't blade, but he does it anyway. He's busted wide open. uh, Randy Savage wins with the roll up. He hooks the trunks, which gets Bobby Heenan and Mr. Perfect so irate, so upset that after the match, Bobby Heenan and Mr. Perfect go to the back with Sean Mooney, and they're like, "He had the trunks. He had the trunks, Mooney. He had a handful of trunks." Mr. Perfect is like, "Randy Savage, you're just like your old lady, a cheater. You had a handful of trunks, and you know it. You taking shortcuts in life." And then Randy Savage's interview. He's like, Mr. Perfect, you're not perfect. I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. But Ric Flair, this is only the beginning, Ric Flair. This is only the beginning. And he tells Elizabeth, take this and go, Elizabeth. Yeah. And she goes to the back. And then what gets him really upset is that what does Ric Flair do? He kisses Miss Elizabeth. He kissed her right on the lips. So at the interview, at the end of the interview, Ric Flair goes, Randy Savage, when I see your old lady, I'm a kisser on those boys' wet lips. Woo. And, and Flair's face is all bloodied up. Man, WrestleMania 8 was fun. The Undertaker versus Jake Roberts match. Undertaker makes quick work of Jake the Snake Roberts, and this would be the last time that we see Jake Roberts in the WWE until 1990, until Royal Rumble 1996. Um, he goes to WCW for a while. He has a Halloween Havoc match with Sting. He has some contracts dispute because he signed a contract in WCW when they fired Jim Herd and a guy named Kip Fry took over, and he offered Jake a bunch of money. So by the time Jake by the time Jake gets there, because Pat Patterson had been fired, so Jake wanted to be a part of WWF Creative. He wanted to be the booker basically for the WWF. Vince McMahon says no. So Jake Roberts leaves the company, and he thinks he got all this money waiting from this Kip Fry contract in WCW. But who does he see there? His father's old partner and his old nemesis from Mid South Wrestling, Bill Watts. And Bill, Bill Watts looks at his guaranteed contract, tears the shit up in his face, says, I'm not paying you this. So Jake Roberts has one match, I think it's a coal miner's glove match in Halloween Havoc 92. Then he leaves the company. You know what I mean? Because he hates Bill Watts. Even to this day, he says he'll piss on the grave of Bill Watts when Bill Watts dies. You know what I mean? So he despises Bill Watts. And Bill Watts did cause a lot of problems for WCW. With the wrestlers, he reduced a lot of their contracts because his philosophy was like, you offer these guys guaranteed money, they're not going to work. They're not going to have the incentive to improve themselves. Or offer them guarantees instead of guaranteed, opportunities instead of guarantees. Let them earn their keep. And he also, basically eliminated the light heavyweight division, which this year is about WWF, but I'll mention about WCW a little bit. This year at Super Bowl II, the opener was Japanese star Jushin Thunder Liger versus Brian Pillman. This when Kip Fry was still there, and he lit up the light heavyweight division. So many high flying moves, things that we had never really seen in North American professional wrestling in terms of high flying. It was a great match, man. It was one for the ages. It was so great that on the first Nitro, this is the match they did the rematch to because it was still great and it stuck in fans' minds. But Bill Watts comes in the middle of 92, and he wants to eliminate all that. He wants to eliminate canvases, mats on the side of the ring. He wants to eliminate all this stuff with the pay structure. He's messing with a lot of the people's money, the pay structure. Also, he's messing around with a lot of the corporate suits. He goes into his office one day, he pisses off the suits by urinating off the balcony, and then he does this interview with Wade Keller in the Torch, where he says he defends Lester Maddox, a famous 1960s segregationist governor. I think it was Mississippi or whatever, one of the Jim Crow states. He basically defends Jim Crow segregation, and he basically accuses black people of, being responsible for all the crimes, and all the poverty. Basically says a whole bunch of racist stuff. And this was at the time that Marge Schott, a baseball manager, had basically said some racist shit. basically saying that her baseball players were her $1 million N-word. So companies at this time were not playing around with racist comments like this. It somehow gets wind to Hank Aaron. Hank Aaron then pressures TBS to fire Bill Watts, and then they have to bring somebody else in the end of '93, and somebody else they bring in is Eric Bischoff, an announcer. He was an announcer at that time. But yeah, Bill Watts was saying some really racist shit, defending Lester Maddox, and it really confused a lot of people because in 1992, Bill Watts did the same thing that did in WCW, did what he did in Mid South Wrestling. In Mid South Wrestling and in UWF, he was especially during its Mid South years before it went national in the early '80s, he was famous for putting African American stars, especially the Junkyard Dog, as main baby faces, even heels with Bush Reed. He tried to do it again with Master G. He tried to do it again with different guys. You know what I mean? But it was never the same as when Junkyard Dog was there. When Junkyard Dog was there, he was he basically had the whole state of Louisiana on lock, the whole territory on lock. Junkyard Dog was one of the ones who they would use the "Who Dat" chant with. Who dat gonna beat that dog? You know? And when Junkyard Dog was blinded by the Fabulous Freebirds in 1982, this guy actually showed up at the arena with a gun, ready to shoot, ready to shoot like Michael P.S. Hayes, for blinding the Junkyard Dog, and he was with Freebird shaving cream, and he was not able to see the birth of his daughter, right? So Bill Watts had been utilizing African American talent forever because when he was in the WWE in the '60s in Washington D.C., he saw how they utilized Bobo Brazil. Washington D.C., large African American population. He said the African Americans will pay money to see an African American star. So for him to defend Lester Maddox and defend segregation and defend and say all this inflammatory stuff about the miniseries Roots, and say all this inflammatory stuff in response to the Rodney King riots which were going on at that time was really messed up, man, and really surprising because he not only had the first black star of a major territory in the Junkyard Dog, but also the first black booker in Ernie Ladd in his promotion. So he tried to do the same thing in WCW when he made Ron Simmons the champion, and he made history making Ron Simmons the first black champion of a major promotion in wrestling. So people were, and he would do the same. He would actually, when he would go to WWE in 1995, he would do the exact same thing. He was behind pushing Mabel to become King of the Ring and pushing Ahmed Johnson at first. He always believed in pushing black baby faces and black stars in general and black people because he believed that he had the philosophy that every other sport is dominated by black people, and people know that black people are superior in athletics to white people. And what makes wrestling look like complete bullshit, what makes wrestling look like it's extra fake, is that there are hardly any black stars at the top. So he's like, put black stars at the top. Not only will black fans get behind them, but white fans, Hispanic fans, Asian fans, all kinds of fans will get behind a black star if you push that black star right. So he did it in WWF, he did it in WCW in '92, and he did it, of course, in his own promotion, especially with the Junkyard Dog. That's why WWE was interested in the Junkyard Dog. I don't think they utilized him as much as Watts did. Watts, when he had his biggest matches, when he was selling out the Silver Dome in Louisiana, was when Bill Watts he was working for Bill Watts, not only wrestling the Freebirds, but teaming up with Dick Murdoch, the first interracial tag team championships in the mid '80s, and basically just as big as Dusty Rhodes was in Florida, or Hulk Hogan was in New York, or Bruno Sammartino was in New York. Huge star, the first big African American star ever, in professional wrestling. People say, well, what about Sailor R. Thomas, or what about Bearcat Wright? But I'm talking about in the '80s when wrestling really started to boom. Was the JYD, and it was because of Bill Watts. So for Bill Watts to say these comments in the torch was really shocking. He got under a lot of people's skin, and he was fired. He was let go. Brian Pillman hated him because he didn't push the cruiserweights, which was odd too because um, before the Junkyard Dog, the biggest star in the Tulsa area when Leroy McGurk was the promoter was Danny Hodge, and Danny Hodge was a junior heavyweight. He wasn't a heavyweight, so I don't get this prejudice against little guys. But I guess when Bill took over the territory, and he did, he brought in a lot of big guys. He didn't even want to bring in at first the Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express. So I guess he did kind of always have that prejudice. So he didn't push Brian Pillman even after that successful match, and he really stymied the light heavyweights. And Scott Steiner hated him famously because he wanted to break up the Steiner brothers and turn Scott heel, which in hindsight was great. One of the things he did that was really revolutionary was he brought back Jim Cornette in '93, and early part of '93 before he was let go at Super Bowl. He did an invasion angle where the Heavenly Bodies from Smoky Mountain Wrestling wrestled against the WCW wrestlers. But then when he was let go, Bischoff wasn't interested, so Jim Cornette and the Heavenly Bodies went elsewhere, and later on in that year, they showed up on WWF TV. How ironic. But going back to '92, and Jake Roberts, another Mid-South alumni, um, Bill Watts didn't want to push him, so he left the WWF for no reason. He was ceremoniously let go by Jake Roberts, and he floundered around for a couple of years until he came back as a Christian in '96 with the whole Christian gimmick. But he was one really responsible for making The Undertaker a babyface. I talked about the Roddy Piper Bret Hart match. That was pretty good. A classic, one of the things we remember from WrestleMania 8. And now to the main event, Hulk Hogan versus Sid. Of course, Sid now managed by Dr. Harvey Whippleman. The best thing about Dr. Harvey Whippleman was seeing the interplay between him and Howard Finkel. Howard Finkel would announce him and he'd be like, "That's Dr. Harvey Whippleman to you, little man." And then, you know, they had a shitty wrestling match. The only thing we really remember is Hogan's entrance. The camera pans out all the way to the aisle, and they wrestle. And it was supposed to be a run-in by Papa Shango. Papa Shango misses his cue. He comes in later, and Sid actually does looks like he defeats Hulk Hogan. It ends in a double disqualification. And then Papa Shango, one of uh, Harvey's henchmen, comes down, and the Ultimate Warrior comes down for the save, and the Ultimate Warrior is back in the WWF. He came to terms with WWE, so he went out walking through a door, chasing heels away, and he comes back walking through a door, chasing heels away. The Ultimate Warrior makes the save for Hulk Hogan. How poetic. But all throughout the build-up to this match, they're making it seem like Hulk Hogan is no longer going to be with the company. They're making it seem like his time is up. This is his last match. He has a candid sit-down with Vince McMahon where he's talking about, he says, "Well, if this is your last match, it's been real." And we're all like, yeah, Hogan's not going anywhere. But he does. After WrestleMania, he is no longer around. So, ironically enough, it's just like 1990. The Ultimate Warrior is back, and the onus is on the Ultimate Warrior's shoulder. Macho Man is the champion. But his biggest adversary going into SummerSlam is going to be the Ultimate Warrior. So 1992 after WrestleMania 8 is pretty weird. You know what I mean? Because, again, you have Macho Man. He's the champion. But his biggest opponent coming up is going to be Ultimate Warrior. So that is for the next biggest pay-per-view, because remember, they only have 4. For the next biggest pay-per-view is going to be now they're baby faces now. Now the roles are reversed. Macho Man was a heel in '91, and Warrior was a baby face. And it was Warrior who ended Macho Man's career briefly. right? So, but now Macho Man is the champion, and Warrior is the challenger. There's something else at stake. Remember Warrior's tights from WrestleMania 7, where it says bigger than the championship, and a picture of the championship drawn on there. So that's the storyline. Now they're both baby faces. But another big storyline surrounding it is who is Ric Flair going to take the side of? Is he going to take the side of his mortal enemy, Randy Savage, or is he going to take the side of the Ultimate Warrior, who he doesn't really know, but like they've had some confrontation since Warrior has come back? We don't know. Another big main event going into SummerSlam 1992, which is a packed house, by the way, is going to be the newly crowned Intercontinental Champion again in another babyface match against yet another family member, the British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith. British Bulldog, he had left the company in um, I think it was in the late '80s. I think WrestleMania 4 was like his last match when they had Matilda, uh, there with the British Bulldogs taking on the Islanders and Bobby Heenan, and Bobby Heenan had the suit on, protect him from Matilda. And then the British Bulldogs got into that fight with the Rougeaus, and they were going from the WWE. But now, 2 or 3 years later, British Bulldog is back. It's sort of like Cody Rhodes. He has a new look, braids, everything. He looks like a real superstar. And the UK, like I said, is getting really behind him. So they're going to Wembley Stadium. He's won a battle royal at Royal Albert Hall, and they're going to Wembley Stadium because business is really falling off in the WWE in the United States. So they have to go to they have to go overseas to draw a house. And one of the places they've always really loved professional wrestling, especially the WWE, because of its availability on Sky Network, is the UK. So they go to the UK, SummerSlam 92, packed house. British Bulldog has just won the Battle Royal at Royal Albert Hall for #1 contendership. And keep in mind, British Bulldog in real life is married to Bret Hart's sister, Diana. So they had Diana play somewhat of a role, like who's she going to choose, whose corner is she going to be in, Davey Boy's or Bret's. And this is the main event. Going into it, the interviews were a little bit funny because they were like, this one kid was like, British Bulldog is going to win whether he wants to or not. Like, kid, what? Does the kid know it's a work? He probably does. And so, anyway, SummerSlam 1992, one of my favorite shows, man. The ambiance for this, and what is Undertaker doing? Undertaker is wrestling Kamala because now Undertaker has beef with the spooky stars of Harvey Whippleman. And Harvey Whippleman has brought back the Ugandan giant, the mighty Kamala. And this run, people say the Hulk Hogan run in the mid 80s was the better run because Kamala was making the main event money. He was coming off his big runs that he had. He had with the JYD, his big runs in World Class with the Von Erichs. He had big runs in every territory that he's ever gone to. So people always point to that big run when he came into New York and he worked with Hogan as his run. But to me, I wasn't watching then because I was like 1 year old. You know what I mean? So to me, when I was exposed to Kamala, his big run was '92 when he had the match with Undertaker, and this was a thing where Undertaker was going all around the country. He's a new baby face, so he's going all around the country with him and Paul Bearer, in this hearse, which was Andre the Giant's old bus. Andre the Giant and Tim White were traveling because Andre was too big to travel regularly like other wrestlers, so he would have his own bus, and they converted the bus into a hearse for Undertaker to travel around the country and in the UK, to familiarize people with Taker. The US and the UK would travel all around for this big match against Kamala. What is Shawn Michaels doing? This match with Shawn Michaels and the model Rick Martel is very interesting because they're both heels, but they're fighting over Sherry Martel's affection. So two heels fighting over Sherry Martel, and Sherry Martel, um, sensational Sherry, she gets she gets a stipulation where neither one can hit the other one in the face because that would mess up their handsomeness. So it's funny. It's a comical match. Nails, who has now debuted, Nails, of course, Kevin Wackles, aka Kevin Kelly in AWA, has now debuted as the Convict. He takes on Virgil at SummerSlam '92, but he is leading up to taking on the Big Boss Man because he has come back. His character has come back out of jail to take revenge on the Big Boss Man because apparently when the Big Boss Man was a prison guard, he did something. He violated um, Nails in some kind of way, and Nails has come to come to the WWF to seek revenge. So they're building him up and building him up. The problem is though his voice. His voice is very low. It's kind of Mike Tyson-ish. So they have to manipulate his voice in some kind of way to make him seem more intimidating. you know? So they deepen his voice. They overdub his voice when he does the interviews. And he wrestles in a prison jumpsuit, an orange jumpsuit. He was all about Orange is the New Black before Uza Aduba or um, even knew what or Laura Prepon even knew what it was. Before Genji Cohen knew what it was. Kevin Wackles, aka Kevin Kelly, was all about that. So they, that's one match. Another match, like I mentioned before, I got it mixed up, is Natural Disasters versus the Beverly Brothers. Pretty good match. And the opener, one of the openers. Oh my God. How the mighty have fallen with this. The Road Warriors, Royal Rumble, they're wrestling the Natural Disasters. They won top of the world in 91 in the Garden, winning the tag team championships from the Nasty Boys. They had a pretty good run against the Natural Disasters, pretty good run against Money Inc. But now WWE has decided to put their spin on them, and they've given them a doll that they now ride around with in their motorcycle with. So not only do they have Paul Ellering, their manager, they have this doll, Rocco, in an episode of Superstars, Hawk found in the trash. So they come out with the doll, Rocco, and they just look embarrassing. And Hawk looks like he's drunk. He doesn't want to be there. And this is almost the end of the road for the Road Warriors here in their first run in the WWE. And Money Inc. made quick work of them. Obviously, they're no longer running with the Road Warriors. It's over for them. End of the road for them. I like Ted DiBiase's outfit, the white outfit that he comes out with. The look of it is, I'm telling you, the look of SummerSlam 92, if you could go back and watch this on Peacock, go back and watch this. The look of SummerSlam 92 is amazing. Other than that, I don't really remember, much else, that they did on this show that really happened. But as far as who corner Ric Flair is going to be in, Ric Flair was in nobody's corner. They beat up both the babyface. I mean, that was predictable. Randy Savage and Ultimate Warrior, they were both babyfaces. So why would he be in any of their corners, right? This is setting up for Survivor Series 1992, the match between Ultimate Warrior and Randy Savage, which, a match Ultimate Warrior and Randy Savage will have against Ric Flair and Razor Ramon, who is Scott Hall coming in from WCW. He was the Diamond Stud in WCW, and he's coming in at Survivor Series 92. But that doesn't happen because of drugs. Ironically, Um, Razor Ramon is based on the drug dealing character, the Scarface character, and both the new Intercontinental Champion, Davey Boy Smith, who has an incredible match with Bret Hart. Bret Hart has to carry him throughout the whole match because the night before he was smoking crack, and this is according to Bret Hart, with Jim the Anvil Neidhart, another brother-in-law, and him and Bret had gone over the match, and as they're about to go out for the main event now, this is in British Bulldog's home country for the first time ever. The Intercontinental Championship is main eventing a big time pay per view, a SummerSlam, the second biggest one next to WrestleMania, and British Bulldog just comes out and be like, "Oh, I forgot, Bret, I'm fucked." He forgot the steps to the match they had gone over, they had to rehearse. Bret Hart says, "Don't worry about it, baby. I got you. I'm not going to embarrass you, my brother-in-law, in front of your home country here in the UK." Davey Boy Smith comes out with boxer Lennox Lewis. It is a huge event for him. And even though he was intoxicated the night before on crack, he still, performs pretty well. You can't tell. It's a good back and forth match. He beats Bret with a roll up, and the crowd goes crazy. One of the biggest pops ever. But swinging around to Survivor Series 1992, he gets fired for steroids. Both he and the Ultimate Warrior gets popped. So both British Bulldog and the Ultimate Warrior, their push is out. So they got to give the Intercontinental Championship to somebody, again, who's the number one contender. Back from WrestleMania time is Shawn Michaels. So Shawn Michaels defeats the British Bulldog in the last Saturday night's main event that they have in 1992. They had done the Saturday night's main event since the 80s. Of course, Dick Ebersol loved Vince McMahon. They've been partners. They'd be partners again in 2001 for the XFL. They're partners even now because Peacock in 2021 purchased the rights to the WWE Network. So NBC Universal has always had that working relationship with WWE, but their ratings have been steadily declining over the years since 1987 when they had their first Saturday night's main event, the Hogan Andre rematch. 88, the Hogan Andre rematch. They've been steadily declining. Now, by 92, it no longer makes any sense for them to have it on. They could have something else on. For the last Saturday night's main event match, it's a really good match. Shawn Michaels defeats the British Bulldog for the Intercontinental Championship. And going into 1993, Shawn Michaels is the Intercontinental Champion, and British Bulldog is out. So is the Ultimate Warrior. He is no longer in the Survivor Series tag team match with himself and Randy Savage against Razor Ramon and Ric Flair. What they do is they call an audible. They turn Mr. Perfect heel. There's a great heel turn against Bobby Heenan, where Bobby Heenan slaps him on prime time. He tells him, "You're not going to team with Randy Savage. You're going to listen to what I do. You walk behind Ric Flair. You understand me? You walk behind Ric Flair." And then he slaps Mr. Perfect, and then Mr. Perfect grabs him by the tie, and Bobby Heenan's groveling like the pussy and the weasel that he was. You know what I mean? And Mr. Perfect comes back to the ring after years, and after a couple of years of being gone as the executive consultant, he wrestles Ric Flair. He would inevitably, on an episode of Monday Night Raw, I think it was like one of the first few episodes after the Royal Rumble, be the one that will have the loser leaves town match with Ric Flair that would result in Flair going back to WCW. And ironically enough, wrestling Barry Windham, the guy that he wanted to put over anyway. WCW at this time is really suffering. Lex Luger is the champion, but Luger is not able to carry the torch. They turn Luger heel at the Great American Bash 1991, one of the worst Great American Bashes ever. So it was so horrible that they retired the brand of the Great American Bash after this. And they don't bring it back until 95. That's how terrible it was. They put him with Harley Race as his manager. thinking that that's going to make him a star, but it just sucks for Luger because he waited all those years, all throughout in 1988 when he was wrestling Flair. He thought he was going to win. He was going to win. He was going to be the champion. He finally does it in 91, and nobody cares. So to the end of 92, what does he do? They finally have him drop it to Sting at Super Bowl 2, and Luger is gone from the company too. Luger, the guy that wanted to build the company around after Flair left, he also leaves, and he has a non-compete clause in his contract that WCW put in. So the way that WWE worked around it was they had him sign with the World Bodybuilding Federation, which was this bodybuilding federation on pay-per-view that Vince McMahon was going to launch. It was one of his big non-wrestling brilliant ideas like WWE Studios or the XFL. He was going, or Linda McMahon running for Senate twice, right? 2010 and 2012 respectively. None of it worked. All of it failed. And WWF was his first failure. So they introduced Luger as the face of the WBF at WrestleMania 8. And I'm excited because I know Luger was in WCW at this time and former WCW champion. So I'm like, yeah, they're bringing in Luger. They don't bring him in until Royal Rumble 1993. Go check out the 1993 video on the archives. But he does kind of make a semi-appearance here at WrestleMania 8. So besides all that, and Survivor Series 1992 ends with Shawn Michaels taking on Bret Hart. Is another Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart match. Bret Hart, now the World Wrestling Federation champion, he defeats Ric Flair. Razor Ramon comes in, debuts. He helps Ric Flair defeat the Macho Man, ending the Macho Man's reign because when he first came in, the first person he cut a promo on was the Macho Man. He was the one that defeated the Macho Man. That helped Ric Flair defeat the Macho Man, setting up their match. But then in Saskatchewan, out of nowhere, Bret the Hitman Hart has a throwaway match with Ric Flair, and he wins the WWF Championship. So out of nowhere, Bret Hart, with no build-up whatsoever other than the SummerSlam 92 match in Saskatchewan, Canada, defeats Ric Flair. So Bret Hart going into Survivor Series 1992, he is now your WWF champion, taking on your Intercontinental champion, Shawn Michaels. So the match they were building up in the beginning of 1992 now ends in 1992. But this is kind of weird because you don't have Macho Man, you don't have Ultimate Warrior, you don't have Hulk Hogan, you don't have none of the stars that you built the promotion around because of their steroid scandal, because British Bulldog and Ultimate Warrior got popped. Now you're building it around these two guys who were perceived as mid-carders or tag team wrestlers. It was pretty weird, the end of Survivor Series 92, but it was a pretty good match nonetheless. Now, to talk about what was going on behind the scenes in the WWE at this time. Behind the scenes in the WWE, a lot was going on. People were suing the WWE for child molestation. Announcers like Mel Phillips were being called up because he was allegedly seducing ring boys. People like Pat Patterson were allegedly doing that. People like Terry Garvin were allegedly doing that. Remember when I said that the job for Booker was up and Jake Roberts wanted it because Pat Patterson was Vince McMahon's right-hand man for many years, was finally gone? Well, this was why. They had accused Pat Patterson of molesting, underage boys that would come to the show. Mel Phillips, the announcer, as well. And Rita Chatterton, a female referee at this time, also accused Vince McMahon of rape. And then, on top of that, the steroid scandal happens. Now the WWE is accused of steroid distribution, which will come to a head in 1994 with Vince McMahon's steroid trial, right? So all of this is happening, compounded with the decline in storylines. WWE starts to take a nosedive. That's why in 92, they had to go to another country just to draw money. And one of the reasons why they were pushing Bret Hart, because he was such a huge international star, in places like the UK, Canada, and India. So they could go overseas and they could push Bret Hart overseas because Bret Hart was really popular overseas. The one that's popular in the United States. You know what I mean? They needed an overseas face because that's where most of their fan base was. They started to do that too in 2011. When they started to lose fans in 2011, who they put the title on for a while, Del Rio, because they knew they could draw a house in Mexico. WWE knows what they're doing when it comes to shit like this. And this is why at first they were pushing British Bulldog and then they started to push Bret Hart because they knew they could draw a house overseas, whereas they couldn't in the United States. The American audience had lost faith in them. I mean, Hulk Hogan lied. He said he never used steroids on the Arsenio Hall show. And then the trial comes and he admits that he did use steroids. And they're trying to get Vince McMahon behind bars, the federal government, for this child molestation stuff, as well as the steroids distribution. It really comes to a head. There is an episode of Phil Donahue show where Dave Meltzer is on there. Barry O, who is Barry Orton's uncle, also accused WWF officials, I think Terry Garvin, of sexual harassment in the workplace. He said if he wanted to get ahead, he wanted to get that push, he had to do the push, of Terry Garvin. And it was a lot of sex scandals surrounding Titan Towers, a lot of controversy surrounding Titan Towers. And that coupled with declining ratings, they really suffered, especially in the United States. Other Canada and overseas, no, not so much. They were still really popular. So Hulk Hogan has to take time away from the business. Ultimate Warrior, who just came back, had to take time away from the business. And by the time Hulk Hogan comes back in 1993, he's skinnier. Fans like him even less. And the fact that he shits on Bret Hart's run and defeats Yokozuna at WrestleMania 9 makes it even worse. But that's in the 93 video. But as far as 1992, one thing else I forgot to mention. The debut of a star they were basic besides Razor Ramon, that they would basically build a promotion around in 1992 would be the Native American Tatanka. Native American Tatanka, Chris Chavis, a real lumpy Native American, will be one of the biggest stars of this era. To the point, I think he wrestles Rick Martel at WrestleMania 8. I think that's his debut, right? And he remains undefeated until like November of 93. And he's one of the biggest stars going into 1993. He's one of the people that I really remember. Why he gets derailed and depushed has to do with another sex scandal that he himself was involved with. He and Jimmy Del Rey from the Heavenly Bodies in 1995. But at this time in 1992, he is doing really well. And they are really pushing him. The first real Native American star in the WWF, because for years, during the 70s and early 80s, they had Chief Jay Strongbow. And while McDaniel was there for a while in the mid 60s, I think it was like 66, 67. And even though Wahoo McDaniel, when he was a football player, he played for their Jets, he was never as popular in the New York City area as he was in other places like in Houston or in the Mid-Atlantic territory or even in the AWA. But in New York, he was never as popular. So when he left, they gave Joe Scarpa the gimmick, and he became Chief Jay Strongbow. And Chief Jay was very popular among the WWF fans, but Chief Jay wasn't a real Native American. He was kind of like Adnan Al-Casey, playing Billy White Wolf. He was a fake Native American. But Tatanka was a real Native American, and he came out with the headdresses and everything. They would incorporate it into his gimmick. There was one time in '94 when IRS wanted to repossess his gimmick, and IRS, they give him the headdress, Wahoo McDaniel and Chief Jay Strongbow on Raw, and IRS destroyed his Native American headdress. Wow, WWF did some really offensive shit. Shit they wouldn't get away with today back in the 90s. But 92, he was on Raw. I love Native American Tatanka. I think if they never would have turned him heel at SummerSlam 94, they never would have derailed him, and he could have been something big. You know what I mean? But they turned him heel with Ted DiBiase, and it was just like, what? The natural disasters, they don't. What happens with them is they don't do much. Um, they're just kind of there until Fred Ottman decides to go to WCW and become the Shockmaster in '93, and has that embarrassing moment, that everybody still talks about. The Shockmaster, that's Uncle Fred. Cody Rhodes said to his father, "That's Uncle Fred." And Earthquake, he sticks around for a while. He has a sumo match with Yokozuna on Raw in '94. He beats Adam Bomb in a couple of seconds at WrestleMania 10. But overall, he himself, in December of '94, decides to join Three Faces of Fear and go to WCW as well, teaming with Judas Beefcake and Kevin Sullivan as Avalanche. And then he becomes, Dungeon of Doom, '95, the Shark, and then he declares he's not a fish, not a fish. He has a silver dollar match against Big Bubba Rogers at '96 Bash at the Beach. And then he comes back to the WWE in 1998 as Golga, part of the audience. So he had a hell of a journey, John Tenta, but I always remember him as Earthquake, especially the Canadian Earthquake, when he first came out and he was a tag team partner with Dino Bravo, and he smashed the back of the Ultimate Warrior. He was an audience member. The Ultimate Warrior challenged him, and he came out and he smashed the back of the Ultimate Warrior. And then, of course, SummerSlam 1990, all throughout 1990, he had the feud with Hulk Hogan. Brother Love Show injured Hulk Hogan. First guy to, since King Kong Monday, I believe, to really take out Hogan. So much so that we had to have a letter writing campaign to bring Hogan back. To get for him to get well. Undertaker, he defeats Kamala, and then he defeats Kamala in Survivor Series 1992. Casket match. Kamala isn't gone, but he breaks up with Kim Chi, who is Steve Lombardi, the Brooklyn Brawler. He breaks up with Kim Chi. He breaks up with Harvey Whippleman. Harvey Whippleman gets mad. That's why he brings in the Giant Gonzalez in '93 with The Undertaker. And what happens to Kamala? He turns babyface. And Reverend Slick tries to civilize him. He teaches him about bowling. He teaches him about, a whole bunch of how to eat like a normal person. And fans, as a babyface would Kamala, they would start to chant, you're a man, you're a man, you're a man. Because for all the time we've known Kamala as wrestling fans, no matter what the territory, he's been a savage. So now Slick is trying to humanize him, and they're saying, you're a man, you're a man. And then Kamala is now a babyface. Kamala said in later interviews that he didn't really like being a babyface. He enjoyed being a heel more. He worked more better as a heel, but he was never again a heel in the WWE. When they would bring him back other times, like in '06 for the Diva search, he was always a babyface. He was a heel again in WCW with the Dungeon of Doom. They had that War Games match, and Hogan, Sting, Randy Savage, and Luger. But in WWE, he was never a heel again. But that was Kamala's last big run. He talks about how there was some payoff discrepancies for SummerSlam '92. Undertaker apparently got twice as much in terms of payoff as Kamala, and that was what prompted him to leave the WWE again and go back to the Indies and eventually WCW 3 years later. So that is basically it for 1992. Overall, 1992 was one of my favorite years, just like 2002 and just like what's shaping up to be 2022. It's one of my favorite years because it's a year that's slept on. Yes, it's not as big as 1985, or it's not as big as 1989, or it's not as big as 1998, or it's not as big as 1997, right? When these times we're talking about, or 1982 even, right? when Hulk Hogan turns heel because of the Rocky movie. I mean, excuse me, turns babyface because of the Rocky movie. Um, in AWA, or when the Freebirds and the Von Erich start their feud, or when the Freebirds and the JYD start their feud, 82, or even when Vince McMahon starts his national expansion, 82 is like the big year, or Andy Kaufman and Jerry Lawler have their thing on Letterman. Those are big years. 98 is a huge year. 99 is a huge year. 97 is a huge year. 88 is a 88 is a huge year. 89 is a huge year with the match Flair and Steamboat, or Savage and Hogan in both promotions. 89 is big. Uh, like I said, 82, 85, Dusty and Flair begin their feud, or the first WrestleMania, or even 87, right? Not for Jim Crockett Promotions, but for WWE especially. 92 is not that. 92 is not one of those big years, but for me, in my fandom, it was. Because I started watching in the early 90s. So 82, 85, 89. I didn't see all that until much, much later, those big years. So for me, 92 was a huge year. Wembley Stadium, WrestleMania 8, and even Survivor Series 92 when Razor Ramon debuts. So that's my review of the WWE in 1992. What would WCW do in 92? Because in 93 I talked about WCW as well. So let me talk a little bit about Vader. The late great Vader would debut in 1992, and he would just run roughshod over the company. And him and Sting at Starcade 92, again they have Battle Bowl. Let's like they had in 91. They have it again in 92. And Muda wins it, where he wins the NWA Championship. Muda, of course, international star, New Japan, wins the NWA Championship. They finally brought it back, the NWA Championship, after Flair took it to another company. They bring it back, and he wins Battle Bowl to win it, the second Battle Bowl in WCW history. And at the end of it, they have a match between Vader and Sting, the King of the Cable match, and it was a prelude for what was to come later on in 1993 with the White Castle of Fear and the leather strap matches that Vader and Sting had, and the classic matches that Vader and Sting had. But Vader, well, this is when he came through with the mask. He was a huge star in 92. Who else was a huge star in 92? Was Cactus Jack. Cactus Jack, I say his biggest year was between 91 and 92. 91, he wrestled Sting. In 92, uh, he wrestled um, he was managing it was a Barbarian. Yeah, he was managing the Barbarian against Ron Simmons for the championship at Halloween Havoc. You know what I mean? So it's a pretty big year for him. He would go on in 93 to turn babyface and have an even bigger year with him and Vader. So controversial because people didn't like the Boston Cleveland stuff, but whatever. But that's what WCW is doing. They're of course going to set up Muda versus Barry Windham for Super Bowl III, in which Flair is there, and Flair challenges Barry Windham for the NWA Championship, beats him at Beach Blast 93, and he becomes the NWA champion, which, again, only to lose it to Rick Rude. That whole Ric Flair and Rick Rude thing causes controversy when WCW starts taping at Disney, and they show Rick Rude with the belt before the NWA officials get to vote on it. Officially, WCW says, well, we can do whatever the hell we want. And WCW separates in 1993 from the NWA. ECW is really just starting off right now. Paul Heyman, as Paulie Dangerously, was just let go. I think they're still really doing shows with Joe Goodhart. They're still pushing older stars like Tito Santana, who is now in 93, he will leave the company. Jimmy Snuka was left the company. I think he left in like 91, right? After he lost the Undertaker at WrestleMania 7. So Joel Goodhart is still doing, Tri-State Wrestling Alliance, ECW. Even Eastern Championship Wrestling hasn't really come into its own yet, all that much. So what's about to happen that will cause the next wrestling boom hasn't really taken shape yet. UFC hasn't even formed yet. That will be the following year that uh, the creators of UFC, the Gracies, um, you know, would would create that promotion, that tournament to prove that Horace Gracie and Gracie Jiu Jitsu is the superior martial arts. You know, Bob Meyerowitz hasn't even thought of it yet, but in '93 they would think of it, and it would revolutionize pay per view. And of course, the mid 2000s become the biggest outselling both wrestling and boxing. So that hasn't even happened yet. '92 is still everything is still in its infancy, still when it comes to wrestling and MMA. But we know that big things are about to happen. Older things are about to die, and big things are about to happen in '92. And it's a big, big year when it comes to backstage stuff. So anyway, guys, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to see my next videos coming out. Love you.